Admiral Lisa Parker called an emergency meeting within 6 hours of receiving news about Danny Phillips. She did not bother with formal protocols or scheduled appointments. She sent direct orders to every human military commander within jump. Range of Earth? They had 24 hours to reach Luna Station. For an immediate conference. The admirals and generals arrived from across human space looking grim and determined. These were men and women who had spent their careers following council regulations and keeping the peace. They had watched their species endure 2 centuries of restrictions and humiliations because they believed in the greater good of galactic civilization. That belief had died with an 8-year-old boy on Haven's Rest. Admiral Parker stood before the assembled commanders and spoke without notes or prepared speeches. "Gentlemen and ladies," she said, "our patience has run out. Effective immediately, we are implementing new operational protocols across all human space." The room was silent. As she outlined the changes, no more alien inspections without proper warrants issued by neutral council arbitrators. No more trade restrictions that did not apply equally to all species. No more blockades of human colonies for any reason. No more watching human children die while aliens play political games. General Mike Davis from the Mars Defense Force raised his hand. "Admiral, these protocols will put us in direct conflict with existing council treaties." Parker looked at him steadily. "General, when treaties require us to watch our children die, those treaties become meaningless pieces of paper." The vote was unanimous. Commander Alex Stone received his new orders while still orbiting Haven's Rest. The Zilithian blockade had been in place for 8 days now, and 3 more children had joined Danny Phillips in the colony morgue. Dr. Sarah Phillips continued working frantically to save the remaining sick kids, but her supplies were almost gone. Stone read his orders twice to make sure he understood them correctly. Then he opened the communication channel to the Zilithian fleet commander. "Zilithian vessels," he said calmly, "you have 10 minutes to clear the shipping lanes and allow medical supplies to reach Haven's Rest colony." The alien commander responded, "Immediately." "Human vessel, you have no authority to make demands. We are operating under council emergency protocols. Any interference will be reported as an act of aggression." Stone checked his chronometer. "You now have 9 minutes and 30 seconds." The Zilithian laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "You cannot threaten us, human. Council law forbids military action against peacekeeping operations. Your own treaties prevent you from—" Stone cut the transmission and turned to his weapons. "Officer, Lieutenant Johnson, target their flagship." Lieutenant Carol Johnson had served on the Guardian for 5 years. She had run countless drills and simulations but had never been ordered to fire on another ship. Her hands shook slightly as she activated the targeting systems. "Sir," she said, "our weapons are not designed for ship-to-ship combat. We only have mining lasers and defensive systems." Stone smiled grimly. "Then we will have to be creative." The Guardian's mining lasers were designed to cut through asteroid rock and process raw materials. They were never intended as weapons, but humans had always been good at repurposing technology. Stone ordered his engineering team to modify the laser arrays and boost their power output beyond safe levels. When the 10-minute deadline expired, Stone gave the order to fire. The Zilithian commander was still broadcasting threats and legal citations when the first laser beam cut through his ship's shields like they were made of tissue paper. The mining laser sliced across the alien vessel's hull, leaving a glowing line of molten metal in its wake. The ship's main engines went dark immediately. The other Zilithian vessels tried to respond, but found themselves facing tactics they had never encountered. The Guardian used its mining equipment to launch asteroid chunks at high velocity while its defensive systems created electromagnetic interference that scrambled alien sensors. Within 30 minutes, half the blockade fleet was crippled and the rest were retreating to safe distance. Medical supply ships reached Haven's Rest 6 hours later. Similar scenes began playing out across human space as news of the Guardians' action spread. When Corthery inspectors arrived at Phoenix Station demanding to search human cargo ships, Station Commander Julie Adams met them at the airlock with a polite smile. "I am sorry," she said. but we are no longer accepting unscheduled inspections. If you would like to examine our facilities, please submit a formal request through proper diplomatic channels." The Corthery official bristled with indignation. "This is outrageous. Council regulations clearly state that," Adams continued smiling. "Council regulations also clearly state that inspections must be conducted by neutral parties with proper jurisdiction. Since you represent Corthery commercial interests and we are your direct competitors in this sector, you hardly qualify as neutral." When the aliens tried to push past her, Adams triggered the station's security lockdown. The airlock sealed automatically, and the Corthery found themselves politely but firmly escorted back to their ship. Adams posted a new sign at the docking bay: "Business hours by appointment only." On the mining station Deep Rock 6, engineer Pete Collins received an interesting request from his supervisor. The crystalline Vorthak had built several monitoring stations near human colonies, claiming they needed to observe human emotional patterns for scientific research. The monitoring stations had been operating for decades despite human protests. Now, Pete was being asked to perform routine maintenance on the power relays that supplied those stations. He was specifically told to check for any potential safety hazards or system failures. Pete was very thorough in his inspection. He discovered that the power coupling on the first station had developed a dangerous instability that could cause a cascade failure if not immediately disconnected. The second station had similar problems. In fact, all 7 Vorthak monitoring stations seemed to have developed the same technical difficulties. "Funny thing about equipment in space," Pete reported to his supervisor. "Sometimes it just stops working." Back on Earth, Dr. Kevin Wright received an urgent summons to address the Galactic Council. The alien representatives were furious about what they called human aggression and treaty violations. The Zilithians demanded that Commander Stone be arrested for attacking peacekeeping forces. The Corthery wanted sanctions imposed for the Phoenix Station incident. The Vorthak claimed their research stations had been sabotaged. Wright listened to their complaints with the same patient expression he had worn for 15 years. When they finished, he stood up slowly and looked around the chamber. "Honored delegates," he said quietly. "For 2 centuries, this council has taught humanity the value of patience. You have shown us how to endure insults, accept restrictions, and submit to authority. Congratulations, we learned those lessons very well." He paused and let his words sink in. "But we also learned something else. We learned the difference between justice and appeasement. We learned that patience without dignity is just another word for cowardice. And we learned that sometimes the most peaceful response to aggression is to make aggression too costly to continue." The chamber erupted in angry voices as alien delegates demanded explanations and threatened consequences. Wright waited for the noise to die down before continuing. "The blockade of Haven's Rest killed 4 human children. Commander Stone ended that blockade. Phoenix Station was being harassed by inspectors with no legal authority. Commander Adams ended that harassment. Our research stations were being spied on by monitoring equipment we never agreed to. Engineer Collins ended that surveillance." Wright's voice remained calm, but every human watching the broadcast could hear the steel beneath his diplomatic tone. "We are not seeking conflict with any species. We are simply establishing new rules of engagement. Treat us as equals and we will reciprocate. Respect our sovereignty and we will respect yours. Threaten our children and we will respond accordingly." The Zilithian delegates stood up angrily. "You cannot simply ignore council authority when it becomes inconvenient." Wright smiled for the first time in years. "Watch us." The Galactic Council emergency session convened 3 days after what alien media was calling the human uprising. Representatives from 600 species filled the massive chamber on the neutral world of Centros Prime. The air buzzed with angry voices speaking in dozens of languages as delegates demanded immediate action against humanity. Dr. Kevin Wright sat calmly in the human section listening to the accusations. The Zilithian representative was describing Commander Stone's actions at Haven's Rest as unprovoked terrorism. The Corthery delegate called the Phoenix Station incident a violation of basic diplomatic norms. The crystalline Vorthak claimed their Monitoring stations had been destroyed by human saboteurs. Wright had attended thousands of these sessions over the past 15 years. Usually he would be preparing his defense, crafting diplomatic language to smooth over tensions and find compromise solutions. Today he simply sat and listened as the alien species revealed exactly what they thought of humanity. Chancellor Zeph Cole of the Zilithian Empire stood at the central podium with his blue scales flashing in anger. "The humans have shown their true nature," he declared. "We offered them guidance and protection, and they responded with violence. We tried to maintain galactic peace, and they chose war." Applause rippled through the chamber from dozens of alien delegations. Wright noticed that most of the applause came from species that had spent the last 2 centuries profiting from restrictions on human trade and expansion. "The time for patience with humanity is over," Chancellor Zeph Cole continued. "They must be contained before their aggression spreads throughout the galaxy. I propose immediate economic sanctions, travel restrictions, and military intervention if necessary." More applause filled the chamber. Wright stood up slowly and walked to the speaker's platform. The chamber fell silent as he approached the podium. Many delegates expected him to offer apologies and beg for forgiveness as human representatives had done so many times before. Instead, Wright looked around the chamber with calm eyes and began to speak in a clear, steady voice. "Honored delegates," he said, "I have listened to your concerns and accusations. I have heard you describe human actions as aggression and terrorism. I have watched you applaud proposals to punish my species for defending our children." He paused and let his words echo through the chamber. "But I notice that not one of you has mentioned the 4 dead children on Haven's Rest. Not one of you has explained why a medical emergency required a military blockade. Not one of you has justified why alien monitoring stations were placed near human colonies without our consent." Angry murmurs started to rise from the alien delegates, but Wright continued speaking. "For 200 years, humanity has followed council laws even when those laws were applied unfairly. We have accepted restrictions that other species never faced. We have endured inspections and regulations that violated our sovereignty. We did this because we believed in the ideals of galactic civilization." Wright's voice remained calm, but every human watching the broadcast could hear the steel beneath his diplomatic tone. "But when you blockade our colonies and watch our children die for political theater, those ideals become meaningless. When you spy on our worlds and harass our citizens without legal authority, cooperation becomes collaboration in our own oppression." Chancellor Zeph Cole interrupted angrily. "You cannot simply ignore council authority when it becomes inconvenient for you." Wright turned to face the Zilithian directly. "We are not ignoring council authority. We are demanding that it be applied equally to all species. Show me the Zilithian colonies that submit to daily inspections by human officials. Show me the Korthri trade routes that require council permission for every shipment. Show me the Vorthic worlds that allow alien monitoring stations to spy on their citizens." The chamber erupted in angry voices as delegates tried to shout over each other. Wright waited patiently for the noise to die down. "You cannot show me these things," he continued, "because they do not exist. The council laws you claim we are violating have only ever been applied to humanity. You have created a system where humans are second-class citizens in their own galaxy, and you are angry that we refuse to accept that status anymore." The Korthri delegate stood up with his tentacles writhing in agitation. "Humans are dangerous. History proves this. Your species nearly destroyed your own planet before joining galactic civilization." Wright nodded slowly. "You are correct. Humanity has a violent history. We have made terrible mistakes and learned from them. But every species in this chamber has blood on their hands if you go back far enough. The difference is that we have spent 2 centuries proving we can be peaceful and responsible members of galactic society." He gestured around the chamber. "How many wars have humans started since joining the council? How many alien worlds have we conquered? How many species have we enslaved or exterminated?" The chamber fell silent because the answer was 0. "We have been model citizens for 200 Years, Wright continued. We have followed your laws, respected your territories, and contributed to galactic prosperity. But you still treat us like dangerous criminals who need constant supervision. The crystalline Vorthek delegates spoke in their singing voice that translated as cold mechanical tones. Human emotions make your species unpredictable. Your passionate responses to stimuli create instability in social systems? Wright almost laughed. You call our grief over dead children unpredictable passion? You think our anger at injustice creates instability? Let me tell you what creates real instability. His voice hardened slightly. Instability is created when you treat peaceful people like enemies until they decide to become enemies. Instability is created when you push patient people until their patience runs out. Instability is created when you mistake restraint for weakness and kindness for submission. Wright looked directly at Chancellor Zefkol. You have spent 2 centuries teaching humanity that strength is the only language the galaxy understands. Congratulations. We have learned that lesson very well. The Zilithian scales flushed darker blue with anger. Are you threatening this council? Wright smiled coldly. I am informing you of new realities. Humanity will no longer submit to discriminatory laws or unequal treatment. We will defend our colonies, protect our citizens, and respond to aggression with appropriate force. You cannot fight the entire galaxy? Chancellor Zefkol snarled. We have no intention of fighting anyone, Wright replied calmly. We simply want the same respect and dignity that every other species takes for granted. Trade with us as equals. Interact with our colonies as sovereign territory. Treat our citizens with the same rights you demand for your own people. The chamber erupted again as delegates shouted questions and threats. Wright listened to their anger and fear with growing satisfaction. For the first time in his diplomatic career, the aliens were reacting to human demands instead of making them. The choice is yours, Wright said as the noise finally died down. You can continue treating humanity as a threat to be contained, and we will respond accordingly. Or you can accept us as equals and partners in building a better galaxy. He gathered his notes and walked toward the exit. The council will consider your words. Chancellor Zefkol called after him. Wright paused at the chamber door and looked back. No, he said quietly. The time for consideration is over. You will experience our words. As Wright left the chamber, emergency sessions began forming among the alien delegations. Within hours, 3 separate military alliances were discussing joint action against human space. The Zilithian Empire began mobilizing its home fleet. The Korthari started organizing economic warfare. The Vorthek calculated the probability of successful military intervention, but in their anger and arrogance, the alien species made the same mistake they had been making for 2 centuries. They assumed that human patience had made humanity weak. They thought that 200 years of peaceful cooperation meant humans had forgotten how to fight. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The war began on a Tuesday morning when the Zilithian Empire launched what they called Operation Peaceful Resolution. 300 warships jumped into the Sol system expecting to find Earth's defenses unprepared and disorganized. Instead, they found the entire human home fleet waiting for them in perfect formation around the planet. Admiral Lisa Parker stood on the bridge of the flagship Humanity watching the alien armada emerge from faster-than-light speed. She had moved Earth's entire military command structure back to the home system. 3 weeks ago, when intelligence reports confirmed that multiple alien species were preparing joint military action, the Zilithian fleet commander opened communications immediately and demanded Earth's surrender. He explained that the Council had voted to place humanity under protective custody until they could be properly re-educated about their place in galactic civilization. Human colonies would be administered by Council peacekeepers and human military. Forces would be disbanded. Parker listened to the demands with growing amusement. After 2 centuries of diplomatic submission, the aliens still thought humans were the same frightened species that had joined the galactic community long ago. Message received, Parker replied calmly. Counter-proposal, you have 30 minutes to leave our solar system or we will remove you. The Zilithian commander laughed with the sound of grinding metal. "Admiral, you are outnumbered 3-1. Our ships are larger and more advanced than your primitive vessels. Surrender now and avoid unnecessary bloodshed." Parker smiled. 29 minutes. The Battle of Seoul lasted exactly 17 minutes. The Zilithian commander discovered that human ships were indeed primitive compared to alien technology. They were also completely unpredictable by conventional military standards. Human vessels used mining equipment as weapons, cargo haulers as missile platforms, and communication arrays as electronic warfare tools. Most importantly, human tactics violated every principle of civilized space combat. While alien fleets maneuvered in neat formations following established protocols, human ships swarmed like angry insects, using seemingly random patterns that made targeting impossible. The Zilithian flagship found itself surrounded by converted cargo ships that launched chunks of asteroid rock at high velocity, while broadcasting jamming signals that scrambled alien sensors. When the commander tried to retreat, he discovered that his navigation computers had been infected with helpful software upgrades that refused to calculate jump coordinates outside the Sol system. By the end of the first day, the surviving Zilithian ships were trapped in Earth orbit with their weapons disabled and their communications limited to local space only. Signs appeared on their hulls written in several languages. "Welcome to Earth. Enjoy your stay." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as other alien species discovered that their military forces faced unexpected technical difficulties. The Korthari battle fleet assembled near their home world but found that their engines would not start. Chief Engineer Mary Foster on the nearby repair station examined their ships and declared the problems too complex for immediate repair. "Could take months to figure out what went wrong," she reported with a straight face. "Maybe years." The crystalline Vorthak attempted to coordinate their response using their vast communication network that connected every Vorthak world. The network had functioned perfectly for centuries until it suddenly developed severe interference problems. Engineer Paul Davis studied the relay stations and shook his head sadly. "Looks like a cascade failure in the harmonic resonance matrix," he explained to his supervisor. "I have never seen anything like it." Within a week, every major alien military force found itself unable to operate outside their own home systems. Their ships could function normally within their territory but seemed to develop insurmountable technical problems whenever they tried to leave. Their communication networks worked fine for local traffic but could not reach other species. The aliens began to realize that humanity had not been sitting idle during 2 centuries of apparent submission. While they had been congratulating themselves on keeping humans under control, human engineers and scientists had been quietly studying alien technology and finding creative ways to improve it. Dr. Anna Thompson led the team responsible for what she cheerfully called efficiency upgrades to crystalline communication systems. The upgrades optimized Vorthak networks for local use while unfortunately making long-range communication impossible. "We just wanted to help them reduce unnecessary power consumption," she explained when questioned about the modifications. Captain Jake Morrison commanded one of the human ships that escorted alien fleets back to their home territories. The escort missions were conducted with perfect politeness and professional courtesy. Human crews offered technical assistance, provided navigation updates, and ensured that alien vessels reached their destination safely. They also made sure those vessels stayed there. By the end of the second week, the pattern was clear. Every alien species that had supported military action against humanity found themselves isolated within their own borders. They could defend their home systems and maintain internal communications, but they could not project power beyond their traditional territories. The isolation was not total or permanent. Alien ships could still travel and communicate if they received proper authorization and technical support from human engineers. But that support came with conditions that most alien governments found difficult to accept. Trade routes reopened. On the 3rd week under new management, human merchant ships began offering transport services to alien cargo that met certain safety and quality standards. The standards were applied equally to all species and enforced by neutral inspectors who happened to be human. Station Commander Julie Adams found herself very busy managing traffic through Phoenix Station. She welcomed alien visitors warmly and processed their requests efficiently as long as they followed posted regulations. The regulations were clearly displayed in multiple languages and applied the same inspection procedures that aliens had used on human ships for decades. What goes around comes around, Adams explained to a frustrated Core-3 trader who was experiencing his fifth cargo inspection in 2 days on Earth. Dr. Kevin Wright received requests for diplomatic meetings from every major alien government. The requests were no longer demands or ultimatums. They were polite inquiries asking if Earth might be interested in discussing new trade agreements and mutual cooperation. Treaties. Wright scheduled the meetings for the following month. He was very busy reviewing applications from alien diplomats who wanted to establish embassies in human space. The application process was thorough and included background checks, financial audits, and cultural sensitivity training. The first round of negotiations took place in Geneva using the same conference rooms where humanity had originally signed the Galactic Accords. Wright welcomed the alien delegates warmly and offered them excellent accommodations and full diplomatic courtesy. The negotiations themselves were surprisingly brief. Wright presented a simple framework for future relations based on mutual respect and equal treatment. Human colonies would be recognized as sovereign territory. Human citizens would receive the same rights and protections as any other galactic species. Human trade and expansion would proceed according to the same rules that applied to everyone else. The alien delegates agreed to every proposal without argument. They had spent the past month learning what life was like when a more advanced species decided you needed supervision and guidance. The experience had given them a new appreciation for concepts like sovereignty and self-determination. Chancellor Zeph Cole of the Zilithian Empire signed the new accords with visible relief. Perhaps we can put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind us, he suggested hopefully. Wright smiled politely. There was no misunderstanding, Chancellor. We simply had different ideas about what equal partnership meant. Now we all understand each other perfectly. The signing ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy and watched by billions of beings. Children on hundreds of worlds would grow up hearing about the 43 days when humanity reminded the galaxy that patience was not the same thing as weakness. The lesson would not be forgotten. In the years that followed, no species would ever again mistake human restraint for submission or human diplomacy for fear. They had learned that the most dangerous enemies were often the most peaceful people when pushed beyond their limits. Humanity returned to galactic civilization as full and equal partners. They traded freely, expanded their territory, and contributed to the greater good of all species. But the balance of power had shifted permanently. The moment humanity's patience snapped had lasted only 43 days. The respect it earned would last forever. The Great Assembly Hall on Nexus Prime had never been so quiet. 300 representatives from across the galaxy sat in their floating seats, all staring at the massive display screen that showed the same disturbing data. Empty space stations, silent colonies, abandoned cities on 12 worlds that had been bustling with human activity just months before. Ambassador Vex High of the Zalarian Republic stood at the central podium, his 4 arms gesturing at the holographic images floating above the crowd. His voice carried the weight of growing fear as he spoke to the assembled council members. The humans were gone, all of them. Every single human in known space had vanished without a trace, and nobody could explain how or why. Elena Martinez had been humanity's chief ambassador for 7 years. She had represented her species with grace and skill, navigating the complex politics of the Galactic Council with an ease that impressed even the oldest diplomatic families. Her office on Nexus Prime still held her personal belongings. Her favorite coffee mug sat on her desk, still stained from her last drink. Her communication log showed normal activity right up until 3 months ago. Then nothing. The disappearance had not been sudden or violent. Council investigators found no signs of struggle anywhere. Human homes on a dozen worlds showed half-eaten. Meals on tables, clothes laid out for the next day, children's toys scattered in playrooms. It looked as if every human had simply stopped what they were doing at the exact same moment and walked away from their lives. Dr. Alan Brooks had been working at the Kepler 442 research station when the exodus happened. His Torin colleague, Professor Kethmer, had been in the middle of a conversation with Brooks about quantum field theory when the human scientist excused himself to check something in his lab. That was the last time anyone saw him. Kethmer found Brooks' workspace exactly as he had left it, except for his personal research files, which had been completely erased. The pattern was the same everywhere. Humans had taken nothing except what they could carry, but they had been very careful about what information they left behind. Every major human research project showed gaps in the data. Every human business had transferred ownership to non-human partners days before the disappearance. Every human military officer had filed proper resignation papers and handed over their duties to alien replacements. Captain Lisa Harper had commanded the engineering division of the joint species vessel Meridian. Her Kralian second-in-command, Zulthik, reported that Harper had spent her final weeks training him on systems she had never bothered to explain before. She had given him detailed manuals for equipment that she usually maintained through intuition and experience. At the time, Zulthik thought she was being unusually thorough. Now he realized she had been preparing for her departure. The most disturbing discovery came from the communication networks. Human colonies had maintained constant contact with each other through quantum relay stations positioned throughout Council space. These stations required human technicians to operate properly, and the technology was too complex for other species to fully understand. When the humans left, they had somehow modified the stations to continue running automatically, but all the data they carried was encrypted beyond the Council's ability to decode. Trade records showed that humans had been quietly selling off their major assets for months before the exodus. They had converted their holdings into portable energy credits and rare materials that could be easily transported. Human shipping companies had transferred their trade routes to alien corporations. Human agricultural operations had trained local workers to maintain their advanced farming techniques. It was as if they had been planning their departure for a very long time. The military implications were becoming clear as reports came in from across Council space. Human officers and advisors had been responsible for designing many of the defensive systems that protected the Outer Rim worlds. Colonel Jake Martinez had created the early warning network that monitored the dangerous border regions where hostile forces sometimes appeared without human maintenance and oversight. These systems were already showing signs of failure. Ambassador Nix Vara of the Hegemony raised a particularly troubling point during the emergency session. Human colonies had been established in some of the most challenging environments in known space. Worlds with extreme gravity, unusual atmospheric conditions, and dangerous radiation levels had been transformed into thriving communities through human engineering and determination. Other species had tried to colonize these worlds for centuries without success, but humans had made them livable within decades. Now these worlds stood empty. Their terraforming equipment still running, but their populations vanished. The advanced life support systems continued to maintain perfect atmospheric conditions for no one. The fusion reactors that powered the cities hummed quietly in the darkness, keeping the lights on for empty streets and vacant homes. Dr. Pete Johnson had been working on breakthrough research in dimensional physics at the Aquarian Science Institute. His partner, Dr. Velanara, found his laboratory in perfect order, but his most important research data had been wiped clean. The backup files that should have contained copies of his work were also empty. It was as if years of groundbreaking discoveries had never existed. The economic impact was already being felt across the galaxy. Human traders had managed some of the most profitable and reliable shipping routes in Council space. Their logistics networks had connected distant worlds and made interstellar commerce efficient and profitable. Without human coordination, trade shipments were arriving late or getting lost entirely. Prices for basic goods were rising as supply chains broke down. Professor Kethmer made a disturbing discovery while examining Brooks' abandoned research. Hidden in seemingly unimportant files, he found evidence that humans had been in contact with species beyond Council space. The data was fragmented and difficult to understand, but it suggested that humans had established relationships with civilizations that the Council had never encountered. These mysterious allies appeared to possess technologies far more advanced than anything in Council space. The final piece of the puzzle came from the border monitoring stations. 3 days before the exodus began, long-range sensors had detected massive energy signatures moving through the outer systems where humans had established their newest colonies. The signatures were unlike anything in Council databases, suggesting ships using propulsion technologies that violated known physical laws. The signals had appeared briefly, then vanished along with every human in the galaxy. As the emergency session continued deep into the night cycle, one fact became increasingly clear to every Council member present. Humanity had not been driven away by outside forces or destroyed by some unknown threat. They had chosen to leave, and they had planned their departure with a precision and secrecy that revealed capabilities no one had suspected they possessed. The humans were gone, and they had made sure that their former allies would have no way to follow them or bring them back. 6 months had passed since the last human transmission, and the galaxy was breaking apart. What had started as confusion and concern had grown into full crisis as the true scope of humanity's importance became clear. Every day brought new reports of failing systems, collapsed trade routes, and economic disasters that spread like a plague across Council space. The agricultural world of Harvest Prime had been feeding 12 systems for over 50 years. The planet's unusual soil composition and violent weather patterns had made farming impossible until human engineers arrived with revolutionary terraforming techniques. Dr. Amy Stevens had spent 3 years developing the atmospheric processors that turned the hostile world into a garden paradise. Now, the processors were failing one by one, and local technicians could not understand the complex systems well enough to repair them. Food shortages were becoming common on worlds that had not worried about hunger in decades. The Kralian Dominion reported that their food reserves would last only 8 more months at current consumption levels. The Tauran Republic was already implementing rationing protocols for the first time in their recorded history. Billions of beings who had taken their next meal for granted now faced the possibility of starvation. Captain Lisa Harper had been more than just an engineer aboard the Meridian. Her former colleague Zulfik was discovering that Harper had been the invisible force holding together dozens of critical systems across the ship. The quantum drive that powered the vessel required constant micro-adjustments that Harper had performed by intuition. Without her guidance, the drive was becoming unstable and dangerous. Zulfik spent sleepless cycles trying to understand maintenance logs that Harper had written in technical language too advanced for him to fully grasp. The communication breakdown was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. Human technicians had maintained the quantum relay networks that allowed instant communication across thousands of light years. These networks required precise calibration and constant adjustment to account for stellar drift and gravitational changes. Without human expertise, the relays were losing synchronization with each other. Entire sectors were becoming isolated as their communication links failed one after another. Trade had been the lifeblood of galactic civilization for millennia, but human logistics coordinators had revolutionized interstellar commerce in ways that nobody fully understood until they were gone. Captain Rick Nelson had managed shipping routes that connected 47 worlds in a complex web of supply and demand. His alien assistants had thought they understood his methods, but they were learning that Nelson had been making thousands of tiny decisions every day that kept goods flowing smoothly across the galaxy. Ships that should have taken 20 days to reach their destinations were now taking 60 days or more. Cargo containers filled with essential supplies were sitting in empty space because their automated navigation systems could not calculate the complex routes that human pilots had navigated by instinct. Merchant vessels that had operated profitably for years were going bankrupt as their operating costs soared. and their delivery schedules collapsed. The military situation was becoming desperate. Colonel Jake Martinez had designed the early warning systems that protected the outer rim worlds from raiders and hostile forces. His networks of sensor stations and automated defense platforms had kept the peace for over a decade. Without Martinez to coordinate their operation, the systems were becoming blind and deaf to approaching threats. Reports were coming in from the frontier regions of increased raider activity, pirate fleets that had been kept in check by human-designed patrol routes were growing bolder as they realized the defensive networks were failing. 3 merchant convoys had been attacked in the past month, with total losses of cargo and crew. The raiders seemed to know exactly where the gaps in coverage had appeared. Even more troubling were the reports from the Zirathi border. The hostile empire had been contained by a series of fortress worlds that relied on human tactical expertise and engineering innovation. General Amy Walsh had been the chief military advisor for the entire border region. Her defensive strategies had kept Zirathi at bay for 5 years without a single major engagement. Now the fortress commanders were reporting that they could not maintain the complex defensive patterns that Walsh had created. Intelligence reports suggested that the Zirathi were massing forces for a major offensive. Their scouts had been probing the border defenses more frequently, testing response times and looking for weaknesses. The Zirathi military was known for its patience and careful planning. They would not move until they were certain of victory, but every day that passed without human military expertise made that victory more likely. Dr. Pete Johnson had been working on more than just theoretical physics at the Aquarian Science Institute. His partner Dr. Villanara discovered that Johnson had been developing practical applications for his dimensional research. Hidden files in his laboratory computers revealed blueprints for propulsion systems that could move ships faster than anything in the Council fleet. The designs were incomplete and written in mathematical notation that even the best Aquarian scientists could not fully decode. The economic collapse was accelerating beyond all predictions. The Galactic Credit Exchange had crashed when human financial analysts stopped monitoring the complex algorithms that kept interstellar currency stable. Worlds that had been wealthy were finding their savings worthless as exchange rates fluctuated wildly. The hegemony's treasury had lost 40% of its value in 3 months, forcing them to cut funding for essential services. Industrial production was grinding to a halt across dozens of worlds. Human engineers had optimized manufacturing processes that other species had struggled with for centuries. Factory complexes that had been producing goods efficiently for years were now operating at 20% capacity as their alien workers tried to maintain equipment they did not fully understand. Professor Kethmar made a breakthrough while studying the files that Dr. Brooks had left behind. Buried in seemingly routine research data, he found evidence that humans had been in contact with 12 different species beyond Council space. These contacts had been ongoing for at least 2 years before the Exodus. The communications were heavily encrypted, but Kethmar could determine that massive amounts of information had been exchanged. The most disturbing discovery was that these unknown species possessed technology that made Council science look primitive. Energy readings from their ships suggested power sources that could fuel entire star systems. Their manufacturing capabilities appeared to be based on principles that Council scientists did not even have theories about. The humans had not just found new allies, they had found civilizations that were centuries ahead of anything in known space. Prime Minister Jaktos of the Toran Republic called for an emergency council session as the crisis deepened. The agenda was simple but desperate: find humanity and convince them to return before galactic civilization collapsed completely. The search would require every available ship and the cooperation of all Council species. Time was running out, and everyone knew that each day of delay made their situation worse and humanity's return less likely.